Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 4, St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. Let us have introduction about the unit. In the declining years of the Roman civilization, St. Augustine 354 to 430 became a major political theorist. His fame rests on his work, The City of God, which effectively answered the attacks on the Christian faith, blaming the fall of the Rome to the Christian indifference to the continued survival of the Roman Empire. Augustine imbibed, reinterpreted, and transformed the entire Greco-Roman philosophical tradition of the Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Polonius, incorporating Hebrew thought and strengthening Christian theology and metaphysics. He left behind a profound body of knowledge and religious faith as a rich legacy to European civilization. In political thought, he represented a turning point. The masters of the Greek political theory, Plato and Aristotle, had conceived the state as man's natural destiny, as the realization of all his intellectual and moral potentialities. Augustine introduced the Christian idea of the dual nature of man, consisting of both a body and soul, and insisted that both these elements must be given due importance in any political organization. There is a divine life above and beyond the earthly or material life of man, and the church is the institution which performs the function of looking after this aspect of life. Thus, the theory of dual allegiance and conflict between the terrestrial and the spiritual authorities become a serious matter for the consideration of political theory after Augustine. We will talk about Saint Augustine, his life and work. Augustine was born in 354 AD at Thangest, now Algeria. He finished his higher education at Carthage, the capital of Roman Africa. His mother professed Christianity, but the boy did not find solace in the Christian doctrine and gave his attention to a Gnostic cult called Manichaeism. But within a few years he broke with it and became a convert to Christianity under the inspiration of Saint Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. Returning to North Africa from Italy after his conversion, he devoted his life to teaching and writing. He became the Bishop of Hippo and lived a monastic life. He died in 430 AD. Augustine's most famous writings are Civitas Dei and Confessions. The Civitas Dei was written to refute the charge that Christianity was responsible for the fall of Rome in 410 AD at the hands of the Visigoths under Alaric. The Confessions recount Augustine's early life of pleasure and indulgence and depicts his spiritual pilgrimage with great philosophical depth and emotional intensity. Now, the next point is Civitas Dei versus Civitas Terrena. Augustine's answer to the critique of Christianity was in the form of initiation of an evangelical astrology presenting history as a constant struggle between the good and evil, culminating in the ultimate victory of the good. Man's nature is twofold, his spirit and body. By virtue of this dual nature, he is a citizen of two cities, the divine city representing heavenly peace and spiritual salvation, and the earthly city centered on appetite and inclinations directed towards the mundane objects and material happiness. Two loves have created two cities, love of self to the contempt of God, and earthly city, love of God to the contempt of self, the heavenly. The divine city, the kingdom of God on earth, which was first embodied in the Hebrew nation, is symbolized by the church and the Christianized empire. The earthly city is the kingdom of Satan, exemplified in pagan empire. The pagan empires are ephemeral based as they are on transient and mutable aspects of human nature. Only the Christian state can withstand these vicissitudes of history and led men to blessedness and eternal peace. It must be remembered, however, that Augustine does not posit a complete separation between the two cities in actual historical experience. These are theoretical constructs, ideal types devised to explain the nature of regimes which are always intermingled in history. Not visible, church is completely free from evil and no state is absolute standing. The only basis and bond of true city, says Augustine in one of his letters, is that of faith and strong concord. When the object of love is universal good, which is in the highest and truest character, God Himself, and men love one another with full sincerity in Him, and the ground of their love for one another is the love of Him, from whose eyes they cannot conceal the spirit of their love. And these two cities and these two loves shall live together side by side and even intermix till the last with mowing, and the final separation shall come upon the earth on the day of judgment. The next point is justice and the state. An important question closely related to the distinction between the two cities is the relationship between justice and commonwealth, or res publica. Augustine refers to Cicero's view that the object of the state is the realization of justice, and himself says that people without law and justice are nothing but band of robbers. But he also contends that only a Christian state can be just, for one cannot give to man his due without giving to God what is due to him. Love of man cannot be real without love of God. Augustine's comment on Cicero on this point has led some noted scholars like A. Carlyle and J.N. Figris to conclude that according to Augustine, justice is not an essential feature of the state. It would appear that the political theory of St. Augustine is materially different in several aspects from that of St. Ambrose and other fathers, who represent the ancient tradition that justice is the essential quality as it is also the end of the state. The argument is that since, according to Augustine, only a Christian state can be really just, a complete identification of state and justice would disqualify all pre Christian states to be called states in any sense. But this is certainly not a correct interpretation of St. Augustine's views. McVeigh and Sabine have rightly taken exceptions to the interpretation of Augustine's point, quite in consonance with his unwillingness to identify the earthly state with the kingdom of Saturn. Though only a Christian state can be just in the absolute sense of the term, one cannot but attribute a kind of relative justice to the non Christian or pre Christian states which look after the worldly need of the man and provide means and opportunities for the civilization of spiritual life. The distinction between absolute justice and relative justice enables us to evaluate the states according to the proportion in which they embody these two aspects, always remembering not from men but from above men proceedeth that which maketh a man live happily. What Augustine's criticism of Cicero amount to is, though a people may be a people without confessing the true God, no people can be a good people without that confession. The next point is state property, war, and slavery. As we have already pointed out, Augustine does not regard the state as natural, though, according to him, man has an innate disposition for social life. State as a repressive institution, as an instrument of coercion for enforcing order and peace, is the product of sin, and it was not found in the primeval state of innocence before the fall of man. This disparaging view of the state by no means implies that we have no moral duty of political obedience. Though the state is the result of sin, it is also a divine remedy for sin. Even the Christian subject of a pagan king are under bounden duty to obey their ruler. Saint Augustine had no doubt that powers that be are ordained by God, and even a wicked and sinful ruler has a right to full obedience. Anyone who resists duty constituted authority, resists the ordinance of God. So long as the rulers do not force their subjects into impiety and a conduct which violates spiritual injunctions and the will of God, they should be obeyed without reservation. Though, on the whole, St. Augustine, like all Christian thinkers of his time, believed in the doctrine of the two swords and the independence of the church and the state in their respective spheres, he was firmly of the view that heresy was a deadly sin and the state has a right to suppress it. The position of St. Augustine on religious tolerance and freedom of conscience was not without contradiction. The argument offered by him proved a weapon in hands of inequitionists later on. About property and slavery, Augustine's views marked a clear departure from Aristotle's. Both property and slavery, according to the saint, are contrary to original human nature, but they become necessary in the actual condition of the fallen man. In the natural condition, property is held in common. After the fall, in view of man's avarice and the instinct of self possession, it becomes almost impossible for common ownership to work satisfactorily. Thus, state control and organization become necessary. In the words of A.J. Crowley, private property is therefore practically the creation of the state and is defined, limited, and charged by the state. But while the legal rights to private property is recognized by the fathers as a suitable and necessary concession to human infirmity, the institution cannot override the natural right of a man to obtain what he needs from the abundance of that which the earth brings forth. Augustine's views on war and slavery are also explicated in the context of the sinful condition of man after Adam's fall. In the ideal conditions of idyllic innocence and eternal peace, war would be unthinkable. But in the present state of strife and insecurity, war becomes a necessity. Even from the moral and religious point of view, the state must wage war to protect the empire and to destroy the heresy. Saint Augustine, as against the early Christians, approves of military service for the Christians. He lays the foundation for the theory of just war, which was developed by medieval thinkers. Like war, enslavement of men by men is also not strictly in accordance with the eternal law, but it is also justified by what Terolch calls the Augustinian doctrine of relative natural law. It is both a punishment and a corrective for the sinful act of men. St. Augustine's views on slavery are opposed to Aristotle's. They are more akin to Scoticism, modified in the light of Christian theology, that is, the notion of the fall of man. Now we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.